to the cloud. So we have two University of Houston people with us tonight. We have only two people from I told Tom all 8 show up every week. Well, only 2 out of 8 are here so far. The others a couple are sick and have family issues. Sunmi and I are the instructors in charge of that class. We have Sarah McNeil, who's a senior professor, shouldn't say senior, just a professor at the University of Houston, an accomplished colleague of ours, of Tom and myself, who sometimes brings us to the University of Houston to hang out with her and to do some kind of presentations in the Kova. What's that called? The room, Sarah, it's called the Kova? You're muted.
Kiva,
not Kova, Kiva. So the university, and that may not exist anymore as they tear the building down, right? And build something new. Maybe they'll save the Kiva. Save the Kiva. Have a protest to save the Kiva, where Tom Reeves is once presented, you know. And so it's really great to see Sarah again during these COVID times where we don't get to hang out with people face to face as much as we'd like to. This is week 4 of R795, which is dissertation prep. And I try and bring in various people who have done research, supervised research, given advice about research, so that my students can hear from someone besides just my opinions about their dissertation research projects and so forth. And so Rachel will get a real treat tonight because her and Yua and Shannon, I got a third, so Shua, Yua, and Shannon will be able to ask Tom Reeves specific questions about their dissertation, and anyone else is here doing research, whether it's Karen from Houston, Nelson from Houston, Haley from Johns Hopkins University, but you're not in DC, are you, Haley? You're living somewhere else, right?
I am from the Baltimore area.
You are from, okay, so not far from the DC area. So Chris teaches remotely. That's why I know that program is a remote one. And so I've asked Tom to prepare a short presentation of design-based research. So I know he has dozens of presentations about DBR that he's presented across the world. And if you had a chance to read his bio today that I sent you, in fact, I didn't just send you one bio, I sent you 2 bios, because one bio doesn't do justice to what Tom has done. But if you look at that real carefully, you'll see something about countries. You know, we have a book on MOOCs and Open Ed in the Global South, many countries around the world. MOOCs and Open Ed around the world, in fact, is another book that we've jointly authored. But Tom's also a former Fulbrighter in Peru and gained a lot of his interest in education as a result of that Peruvian experience. In fact, that was the last place I was before COVID, other than Houston. You know, I was at the University of Houston before COVID. I was in Peru December 2019, and I've worked every day since then. I'm crazy. Tom has worked in 30 different countries around the world. Tom is now living in Rome, Georgia. He has gotten the awards that everyone else wants to aspire to get, and including one from Ascalite. Is that pronouncing that right, Tom?
Yes, Ascalite, the Australasian Society for the Improvement of, what is it? Interactive Learning in Higher Education or something like that.
And that was a 2010. And he also has had the AACE Fellowship and nominated me for one a few years after that, I think, Tom. He got the David, I'm following in his footsteps. He got the David Jonathan Research Award for Excellence from AECT. And he wrote me a letter to help me get that one last year. So we've paralleled in some ways. And I also like dogs. And you'll see in the bios I've sent you his dogs. And they have one of them won awards as a Westie, maybe first place champion award, I believe. And he's now 16 years old. Is that right, Tom?
16, yeah. In fact, he's pounding on the door right now.
So the most important for some of you is Tom co-authored a book on authentic online learning. And Yua is going to be interviewing instructional designers about creating online experiences. I think Shannon might also be dabbling in that area as well. And so if you're interested, include authentic e-learning. Tom will be back next week in my other class talking about authentic learning. Potentially, we'll talk to Tom at the end today. So you can read on and on about what Tom did. He got his he became a full professor at the University of Georgia, UGA. So he's an emeritus faculty at UGA. His PhD at Syracuse University, which along with Indiana, along with Florida State, were always the top programs in the field. And back at the time Tom was there, he met other people like Bernie Dodge and John Hedberg, who became famous in their own right. So the trio of them all moved out on their own in their own territory and space, and each of them found their niches in the world. Bernie Dodge in the area of web quests, if you heard of what a web quest is. And then John Hedberg's done various things. I've hung out with him at many conferences, especially in this e-learning space, online evaluation. Tom and John have a book about online evaluation and assessment, which came out about 15, 16 years ago, Tom, right? Something like that?
19.
19 years now. I endorsed it. That's how I remember reading that one a long time ago. So, Tom, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your background before you get into DBR, or some other things that you want to touch on, or things you want to highlight in your respective career? Now you had been working in prison with incarcerated people, females in Oklahoma and other places. That might be of interest to people.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that we're here with Sarah and other folks from Houston, because my second to the last trip before COVID was to Houston, where Kurt and I were both invited to speak at a medical education conference. And that was a great experience. My wife, Tricia, who's a professor emerita of social work from the University of Georgia, she got to go with me. And that was our last trip, airplane trip together before COVID. And then actually 2 weeks after we were in Houston, I went to Michigan State University and then went to Muskegon, Michigan, and spent a whole day interviewing 40 prisoners about an educational program. And the very next day, they shut down the entire prison system. So my friend Bill Hagan and I were the last people to visit
58.
that prison. And we got great interviews. The program that we're evaluating is basically a one-year curriculum to teach moral values associated with being more successful in your careers and so forth. And these are people that are preparing for reentry. 95% of people who are in prison will be returning citizens. So we need to invest so much in their education if we want them to be successful once they're returning citizens. So anyway, so that was kind of ironic that, here we are now, still reluctant. I haven't been on an airplane since that Michigan trip. And although I'd love to go somewhere, I just still pretty shy about getting on an airplane, but I know some folks do. Should I share my screen?
Hang on a second before you do.
Okay.
Kim Tarvis has just joined us, who's one of my doctoral students. So we're up to 4 students from my class are here now. And Amani, we have an Amani in Bloomington, but are you from Houston, Amani, or are you a Johns Hopkins student?
Hello. Yeah, I am actually at UH. I'm a doctorate student. So I'm a
Great.
first-year doctorate student in the Department of Education.
Well, take all the courses that you can from Susie Gronseth, who's one of our alums, our famous alum, who's now the head of the faculty council at the University of Houston, and won Outstanding Early Career Alumni Award from here last year. There's also Dr. Mimi Lee, who's a graduate of our program, who teaches qualitative methods. Do take some classes with her. And in your spare time, take classes with Sarah McNeil and whoever else you can possibly take. All 3 are great, and everyone else in the university is great. We also have Yayoi Anzi, who Tom knows very well, joining us from Tokyo this morning. Thank you, Yayoi. Yayoi tried coming yesterday for a session we had on maker spaces. with my other class, and I said, sent her a note, Tom's going to be here. Why don't you show up? So she must have just woke up and joined us, right? You put your clothes on and just joined. Yeah.
Right. Good morning, everyone. It's 7 o'clock in the morning in Japan.
Everyone give her a round of applause for coming at 7 in the morning in Japan. Did you already go jogging this morning, I assume?
No, just I was busy wearing makeups. And
Me too.
yeah, I guess so.
Well, great to see you, Yayoi. Tom, why don't you take over and share something about DBR with us then?
Okay, I sure will.
And soon I'll make you a co-host because my internet's been going in and out, and if I do get disconnected, this will stay live. So you'll be a co-host in a second. Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Can you see these slides?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to just give a little brief introduction to design-based research, which I view as a socially responsible approach to educational research. And I hope maybe I'll convince some of you that it is as well. I know many of you are already convinced. And this is just going to be really informal because this has been advertised as Ask Tom Anything. And so you can ask me anything about research, anything about evaluation, anything about dogs. You know, I'm open to just about anything. By the way, the Georgia Bulldogs are the #1 team in the nation and the defending national champions.
Finally, thank you.
Finally, yeah, right. But anyway, so I wish I could be there in person. This was a class with Kurt a few years ago when I was at IU, which is absolutely beautiful campus. My goodness, what a beautiful place. University of Houston's beautiful as well. But I really would love to be with you all in person. So I'm going to say some things that maybe are a little controversial, and you know, we're amongst friends here. This is being recorded, but what the heck? I'm 75 years old, and I guess I can pretty much say what I want.
Tom, I got the same darn white suit on, don't I? I'm gonna have to buy a new suit.
So think about the impact of medical science on your life right now. I actually went online today and made my, I'm going on Thursday morning, I'm going to the local Publix grocery store to get my latest COVID bivariant shot. And it is just really amazing the progress that medical science has made in our lifetime. This was a cover of the Time magazine, which I like to use Time covers. This was not too long before COVID came into the picture, but they were reviewing, you know, the progress, the amazing progress made in public health and medicine and so forth. And of course, they were highlighting the idea of the robot will see you now. But think about it, there's been a 70% decline in the US death rate from cardiovascular disease over the last 50 years, a drop of more than 1% annually in the cancer rate over the last 20 years. Now this last statistic is changed, sadly, because of COVID, but the life expectancy for a baby born in the USA rose from 47 years in 1900 to more than 78 years. That's actually fallen back by almost 2 years now because of COVID. Sadly, almost 6 million people have died around the world from COVID. And although a lot of people seem to be acting as if things are back to normal, they're really not. And so we have to be careful. I wear a mask every time I go outside, you know, into a store or anything like that. In fact, Time magazine recognized the people who were behind these vaccines, which if you know anything about the production of vaccines, this was such an amazing thing, how quickly they turned this around. Normally it took years and years for vaccines to be developed and released. But within a month, the entire genome of the coronavirus was sorted, identified, and posted online. 2 weeks later, designs were already being keyed into machines to create a COVID-19 vaccine. And by December 2020, Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccines were approved. So that was just amazing progress. Imagine if we didn't get those vaccines, where would we be? And so they identified these folks as the heroes of the year last year. Now, most of these vaccines were developed using randomized controlled trials. This is the gold standard within the field of medical science. If you want to find out if a vaccine works, you randomly assign people to get the vaccine and others to get like a saline solution or some kind of placebo, and you see which ones do better. You know, there are heroes who volunteer to participate in these RCTs. So that's the gold standard. Now think about education, especially over education during the last couple of years. We haven't seen much progress. And anytime Time Magazine talks about education, they tend to really have some distressing headlines. And so we've seen that standardized testing, punitive accountability, school choice, these have all utterly failed. Nearly half of US students qualify for free or reduced price lunches, and large investments in educational technology have not paid off. Think about the decades of research and funding that went into online learning. And you would have thought that, okay, here comes the pandemic, we're gonna have to put everybody online to learn. We would have been ready, but we weren't. We weren't by any means. And in fact, 2 recent reports from the World Bank, Remote Learning During COVID, Lessons from Today, Principles for Tomorrow, and Remote Learning During the Global School Lockdown, Multi-Country Lessons. Both of these reports are scathing in their assessment of how effective online learning was. In fact, now, I just saw this morning a story where they're having to send people out just looking for all the students we lost. We lost so many students, particularly in the inner city areas, that just, they didn't participate at all in online learning. Graduation rates in high schools are way down. Graduation rates in undergraduate schools are way down. It's a really sad situation. You think about the people who created the vaccines, they had years of research leading up. They didn't do all that research overnight. They had many years of research leading up to that. So they were ready for the pandemic. Unfortunately, we in educational technology weren't. And so it's been a sad story. There are some successes for sure, but by and large, if you read the popular press, most people are saying it just wasn't working. And in fact, just last month, US Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, is trying to get billions of dollars to be spent for mental health services for the students at all levels in the wake of pandemic schooling. I gave a keynote for a medical education conference in Turkey in May, and we did a study where we interviewed 70 medical students and medical education faculty, and we found that depression was one of the biggest outcomes of the time when they were shut down and not able to get the experiential learning that's so critical to medical education. So some have argued that, okay, education is not as successful as medical science. Let's do randomized controlled trials in education. That's the path to improve education. One such person is Robert Slavin. Now, he was at Johns Hopkins University. He passed away this last year. He wrote one of the best-selling educational research textbooks. And he said that there were only 5 questions you needed to ask about an educational research study. Is there a control group? Are the control and experimental groups assigned randomly? If it's a match study, are the groups extremely similar? Is the sample size large enough? And are the results statistically significant? Now that his is, I view as an extreme position, but that's unfortunately a position that many people in power still hold. Other people agree more with me. Charles DeForges, who's also written education research handbooks, textbooks in the UK. He said that the status of research deemed educational would have to be judged first in terms of its discipline quality, and secondly, in terms of its impact. Poor discipline is no discipline. And we could all agree with that. You have to have disciplined study. But then he went on to say, an excellent research without impact is not educational. So there have been a lot of RCTs done in education. And in fact, the federal government has something called the What Works Clearinghouse that's supposed to compile all the results of those RCTs. And if you look at their studies, you'll find out that, guess what? Very little works. The What Works Clearinghouse has very little guidance for practitioners. So I think that design-based research is best for addressing what we call wicked problems. Probably you know what a wicked problem is. A traditional problem yields itself to simple and complicated problems require time and expertise to solve, but solutions can be found. But wicked problems are so complex that normal expertise and experience do not provide solutions. And I would argue that education during COVID was a wicked problem. And we would have done a lot better had we looked at it as a design-based research problem to be addressed through design-based research than some of the things that we did do. Now, educational technology research, I go back to quite a while in this field. I got my PhD in 1979, so been working in it quite a long time. And our journals are full of research studies. I used to be the editor of one of these journals. I've published in most of these journals. Kurt and Sarah and others have as well, and Yao Yoi. But unfortunately, these journals don't really have much impact on practice. For one thing, they're often written in terms that practicing teachers don't really want to grapple with or can't grapple with. And on the other hand, teachers aren't given time to incorporate research into their work.
Tom, before you go back for a second. As you said that, I got 16 articles in review, and they're in most of those journals. I'm like, I'm gonna have to pull them out of there and put them in a different place. But the top on the left, Alt J, and then the one next to computer assisted language learning. I was revising one for that journal. We got provisional acceptance for a study of Duolingo, motivation of students using Duolingo, and I had just finished my review part and sent it to my co-author right before coming on here. So, we're all publishing these, and all these journals have issues in terms of time for feedback from reviewers. That's a critical time to publish between the time the data is collected is an issue. People who want to see themselves cited, who are reviewers, and they suggest citations, and it's the reviewer's own work that they want to go in it. So there's all sorts of issues and problems with the journals, but the peer review process doesn't, I will say, on the other hand, the peer review process does improve papers for most of the time. And then that's the good side. There are many, but while we might bemoan some of the negatives in here, and there are many, and I'm on the board of a number of these that are listed, and one has just had a major battle from one of the board members who didn't like the fact he wasn't being published so all sorts of things arise, but the peer review process overall does improve things. Tom, you want to comment on that before we move on, because that's important points.
Oh, sure, absolutely. No, it's one of the pillars of science. If we're going to make progress as a scientific field, and not everyone agrees that education is a scientific field, but if we're going to make progress, we have to have peer review. That's absolutely essential. We can't make any progress without it. I look forward to reading your study about Duolingo. I've been using that. I'm starting to take a Spanish class here on the September 22nd. I'm living on a college campus, by the way. I live on the campus of Berry College in Rome, Georgia, which is a very unique college. I encourage you to look at it. I'm taking conversational Spanish, so I've been using Duolingo to get myself ready for this class, because I used to be fairly good at Spanish, but after 40 years since I left Peru, it's kind of faded, to say the least.
Un poquito, although we have a couple people around from Houston area right now that probably could help you. I think Nelson probably knows a bit of Spanish, right, Nelson?
Oh yeah, I'm very fluent in Spanish. Me and Professor Balding talk about this all the time.
Oh, and Fong just said that she just hit 700-day streak on Duolingo. Well, good for you. That's wonderful. That's fantastic. Okay, so let me go ahead here. So one of the problems with the research in our field is we focus so much of our research on the things, whatever new innovation comes out, and they don't come out from our field, by the way, they come out from other areas, but whether it's, iPads or 3D printers or wearable technology, virtual reality, et cetera, we do research on things rather than on problems. I think we need to do research on problems. So our research needs to be focused on ineffective teaching, poor learner motivation. I think one of the reasons that we lost so many students during the pandemic is they just weren't motivated. We've known for at least a couple of decades that online learning is as effective as traditional instruction. There's no question about that, but you have to be engaged with it. And if it hasn't been designed to motivate the learner, then it's not going to be effective. The lack of intellectual curiosity, weak communication skills, insufficient time on task. These are the problems that we faced during the pandemic.
Tom, I'm going to add to that. Go back a second.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. And add to look at Sunne's research on SMILE. Having kids ask higher order questions within while they're reading and ask them of each other and have them challenged to ask level 5 or level 4 and so forth. So Sunmi's been asking the pedagogical side, not just the technology. That's SMILE is an example where we broke new ground with thinking skills. And it's a technology, but it's a technology to increase kids' literacy where they maybe in Mexico and Honduras, they don't only have schools or teachers, but they have the mobile app for question asking and they ask it for one another. My son went to Tanzania with Paul and they set it up for the kids in Tanzania to ask questions, then to write stories with it and that kind of thing. And also Sunmei is working now on online role play within my class, getting students 4 different roles to play on, and she's going to look at what the role play causes in terms of interactions and different learning outcomes and so forth. So these are the issues, and they can be addressed by technology. We just can't pay homage to the technology. We have to think about how to thoughtfully utilize it and ask these questions first. Not just, we don't need to bow and genuflect to the technology. We need to bow and genuflect to these questions that Tom's posing here, the problems and the issues first, and then see what technology might help us address those areas, such as asking higher levels of questions to get students literacy skills. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom, but that's an important point.
Anybody who wants to say anything at any time, please do. So design-based research, I'm just going to encapsulate very quickly. It really starts off with a focus on an important pedagogical problem. So for example, providing experiential learning to nursing students during the pandemic. One of the most important aspects of nursing education is interactions in a clinical setting with real patients, with other practitioners, with physicians and so forth. And of course, that wasn't possible during the height of the pandemic. So then you want to create a prototype learning environment informed by theory and practice. So some folks at the Baylor College of Medicine, right when COVID started, they actually designed a prototype learning environment were medical students, first-year medical students, who couldn't meet face-to-face and certainly couldn't meet with patients, actually participated in a course that was their challenge was to come up with some solutions for how do you provide experiential learning to medical students during the pandemic. It was Satit and some other folks there ran that course, and some of us got to participate. The course emphasized content and pedagogy rather than technology. Technology was important, but the content and the pedagogical strategies were what were really critical. Give special attention to supporting human interactions, test, refine, and retest the learning environment until the outcome is reached. And then at the same time, refine theory, usually in the form of design principles. Now, RCTs are trying to prove what works. Design-based research instead tries to make something work and then understand why it works or why it doesn't work. So it's a very different approach. So Susan McKinney and I wrote a book about design-based research, although we called it educational design research. And this is because Susan is a professor at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And in Europe, they prefer the term educational design research to design-based research. It's basically the same thing. It's just a slight difference. And so we had it's now in the second edition. It's been translated into Japanese, by the way, and love to get it translated into Chinese and Korean. But EDR, DBR is defined more by, is not defined by its methods, like, randomized controlled trials, but by its goals. You want to develop a robust program, product, or policy that addresses a real world problem, and at the same time produce usable knowledge and theory, such as refined design principles. This is our model, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I'll give you a quick example of how this might be applied, and then I'll open it up for questions. So
Tom?
Yeah.
Can I back you up just a second? I think with my doctoral students here, I think it's important for you to elaborate a little bit on this. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to illustrate it
Okay.
through an example here. But yeah, it goes through multiple phases. And one of the problems anytime you represent a model, it really doesn't capture it completely. But you go through phases. A first phase of analysis and exploration, where you're really trying to understand the problem, not just from your perspective as, say, an academic researcher, but also from the perspective of the practitioners with whom you're collaborating. So you do all kinds of things like SWOT analysis and literature review and needs assessment and so forth, and really try to get a shared understanding of what the problem is. And then you go into a phase of design and construction of a prototype solution to that problem. And then you go into a phase of evaluation and reflection, where you're testing and refining the solution to the problem. Now, one of the weak parts of this model is it doesn't really show you that this is multiple stages of evaluation and reflection. But in the end, you hope you have a mature intervention, a new program, policy, or product, and you also have enhanced theoretical understanding. And at the top, you see a figure that basically you'd like to pay attention to how this thing could be implemented and spread beyond the schools or medical schools or prisons that you've tested and refined this product in.
And Tom, I will add that I don't think it's a deficit of the model, but just of the visualization of the model.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
The model itself is robust, but trying to encapsulate that in one visual is difficult, right?
Yeah. No. And it's interesting. There's actually a Pinterest site where someone has captured representations of design-based research. There must be 100 different ones out there. It's really quite amazing. So there was a study published in EDUCAUSE Review in 2015 based on a doctoral dissertation that was done at a Research One university. And the researcher wanted to find out whether or not people recalled more and comprehended more from reading on paper or reading on a tablet device like an iPad or something like that. And so she did her study in a military context where you can do RCTs. She did an experimental study. The study was done at the Coast Guard Academy for non-commissioned officers, and she worked there. And so the study was a classic experiment. She had 231 students who were randomly assigned to either a digital tablet version or a paper version of an 800-word leadership article. And the treatment time was less than 10 minutes. She assessed their learning after they had read the article, either on the tablet device or on paper, with 10 multiple choice items to measure recall accuracy and 2 short essay questions to measure comprehension. And what do you think she found? No significant
differences.
Remember all those journals I had on the screen before? So many of those studies found the same darn thing, no significant differences. And think about it a minute. Why would anyone have thought there would be a difference? For one thing, you're reading an 800-word article about leadership that only takes 10 minutes. It doesn't matter whether you're reading on a paper or on a digital device. You're not taking advantage of the affordances of the digital device. It's just text. It's text on paper or text on a screen. Why would anybody have thought there would be a difference? For the life of me, and I know this is being recorded and I shouldn't say this, but I don't know how this got approved for a doctoral dissertation, but so that it did. But anyway.
And now Kim and Shannon and you are busily looking at their dissertation proposal and saying, oh, what? And Rachel.
So how would we have done this study better if we used educational design research or design-based research? So the first thing I would want to know is, what's the problem? Why has this training school for non-commissioned officers gone out and bought a bunch of tablets instead of just continuing to give the non-commissioned officers their readings on print? Why have they bought these tablets? So we would go through a phase of analysis and exploration, working hand in hand with the faculty there and probably involving some students as well, to really understand, well, what's the problem? Are people not doing the readings? Are the readings not aligned with the assessments? You know, what's the nature of the problem? One of the things I'd want to check for is the alignment within this training course. And by the way, I later found out that that 800-word article had nothing to do with the course that those students were in. They had no investment in learning that stuff. No reason to learn that stuff. Anyway, so I'd want to know, anytime I look at a course or a learning environment, there are at least 7 critical factors that I want to see how they're aligned. The learning objectives. Are you looking at lower order discrete objectives or higher order robust mental models as your outcomes? Is the content something that has one right answer? There's only one way to do it, or are there multiple perspectives? Is your instructional design, your pedagogical design, is it going to be traditional lecture-based, or is it going to be more experiential or authentic or active learning? The tasks. What are the tasks the learners are going to do? Are they academic tasks, writing a term paper, or are they more authentic tasks, like trying to figure out the best way, the safest way to load and unload migrants off of boats when they've tried to escape from poverty in sub-Saharan Africa or something like that. What are the roles of the faculty? Are they didactic instructors, or are they more mentors or facilitators? What's the role of the technology? Is the technology just providing tutorials and videos and so forth? Or are they providing realistic simulations or ways of collaborating among, say, learners and real-world practitioners? And then finally, the assessment. Are you assessing discrete knowledge? You know, what are the 7 things you need to know about X? Or are you looking more at a mental model, a higher level mental model type of outcome? And so I'd want to know if I've got higher order objectives, then I want to make sure that all of these other things are aligned with that. And so maybe in studying that context for that non-commissioned officers course, we might have found some misalignment. Maybe they have higher order objectives, but they're assessing at lower levels. The next thing we would do is develop a prototype solution to whatever the problem was that we just found. So we go through, yeah.
Haley has a question. Haley, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, Haley.
Oh, well, back to your point before, you were saying that the topic of the 800-word article was not relevant to the course that the students were taking. And I was curious if it was relevant, or if it was even of interest to these students. Do you think that the results may have varied, or would it be necessary to test different results if the article was in fact relevant to the students?
Thank you for that question. I don't think it would have, because of just the brevity of the assignment. I mean, 800-word article isn't very much, but I think, though, that let's say they had been using traditional textbooks, and now they've put everything on, say, an iPad or something like that. Well, then there would be some affordances. And I remember years ago reading about a study at a medical school that was an early adopter of laptops, and they put all the textbooks on laptops. And what do you think the medical students did? The first thing they did was they printed all the textbooks out so that they could use those. And I remember an even earlier study where they had these I'm an Army veteran, and when I was in the Army, we had these things called tech lessons that you could study these. It was programmed instruction, basically, printed materials, and you would study these. And when you felt you were ready, you'd take a test. And if you got good results, you could get a promotion. And so they decided, gosh, this was about 1980, to put all those on Laserdisc. Well, it turned out that the soldiers hated them. They said, and I actually interviewed some soldiers on this. He said, we can't take the Laserdisc into the toilet, you know, whereas I can take these program instruction books into the bathroom. And with the program instruction books, they had a little test, and you could flip back and forth to the back and see, you know, the answers. And that's how people studied, actually. They would, you know, have a question, and if they didn't know it, they'd look at the back and see the answer, and then go put in the right answer and practice doing the right answer. You couldn't do that with the Laserdisc. So the affordances that the students liked for studying were lost when they put all these things on the Laserdisc. And when they did this randomized controlled trial studies, very expensive studies, as a matter of fact, they found no significant differences.
Interesting.
So yeah, thank you for the question, but I don't think it really would have made that much of a difference.
For my doctoral students, that's why I print out the dissertations. And I go to the back, I read them in reverse from the ending back to the beginning sometimes. And so I don't follow the rules of the e-text. I think the medical school study was Stanford, probably. At least that's the medical school study I read, where they put everything on the, where Sunmi is at Stanford.
All right.
Very interesting.
Please keep
Thank
those
you.
questions coming. So, you know, we come up with some kind of prototype solution. Now, putting readings onto a device, maybe that's not going to have any impact. But maybe let's think if we could actually have some simulations of important things that non-commissioned officers in the Coast Guard really need to learn. Like if you've got an overloaded boat of migrants fleeing poverty and political oppression, you want to help those people. And how do you safely interdict these ships or these boats that are often just terribly overcrowded, and then help the people come ashore and so forth? You could have some sort of simulation. Then you're using the affordances of the technology to teach something that could be really important. And so then we'd go through a phase of evaluation and reflection to test and refine that prototype solution. And hopefully in the end, we would have a mature intervention, a real use for these tablet devices within this context of the Coast Guard Academy, and enhance theoretical understanding about, say, authentic learning in the context of military training. So that's how I would have approached that kind of study. So basic bottom line for me is that educational design research or design-based research is different, but it's important because it has an impact on real world problems. And that's what we need to have much more of in our field, impact. So thank you. This is a picture of my wife, Tricia, Dr. Tricia Reeves, and our two Westies, 16-year-old Zipper and 13-year-old Button, here at the Spires. That's the building we live in behind us there. Our apartment overlooks a beautiful lake with mountains in the background. And like I said, we live on the grounds of the largest college campus in the United States, 27,000 acres. And it was recently chosen as the second most beautiful campus in the country. What do you think was number one? Stanford.
Indiana, no.
No, Stanford was number one. But Berry College was number two. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah. Well,
and
I'm going to ask that you do one more thing for us.
okay.
And that is, a lot of times you present that study you did in Turkey on the cold chain, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want you to present that, but at least explain it, because it's an example of DBR. So can you give the 2-3 minute version and explain what that is? Because that bells and whistles and light bulbs might go off in people's heads when they hear about that.
Sure. Yeah, that was an exciting project that I traveled to Turkey with the World Health Organization to conduct several times. Really wonderful project. And in fact, I'm still doing work in Turkey with medical education down there. My colleague Umit Kartuglu, he lives in Geneva. He's now retired from the World Health Organization, but he and I continue to collaborate on something. We're just finished up an article that was submitted, is out for review now. But so basically, the World Health Organization had a course that taught public health officers in developing countries how to handle vaccines safely. Many vaccines are perishable. If they get too hot, they're ruined. If they get too cold and they freeze, they're ruined. And so you have to be very careful. You probably know that from the early days of the vaccines, particularly the Pfizer vaccine, was susceptible to problems with temperature. And in fact, someone I know here at the Spires went to get a COVID shot this week, the new one. And when she got to Walgreens, she was told that the sample had been ruined because it had been left out too long. So, I mean, this is a huge problem, managing the cold chain. So let's say a vaccine comes into a country like Turkey. It's been manufactured, say, in France. It's shipped to a port in Turkey. But eventually it's got to get on the top of a mountain village, and it's been taken up there on a back of a donkey or back of a motorcycle and so forth. That vaccine has to be kept at a certain temperature range the entire time, usually 4 to 8 degrees centigrade. And it could be easily ruined. So the way they taught this was once a year, they would bring in 15 people from developing countries. And these people are physicians, pharmacists, public health inspectors, and they would put them on a bus and they would travel down the cold chain in Turkey. And Turkey has a fantastic vaccine system. I mean, they have 98% compliance with vaccines. Do you realize we have polio again in the United States, in New York, of all places? Polio outbreak has been declared a disaster now because people aren't getting the vaccines. And so they would bring them and they would put them on a bus and they'd spend 10 days traveling down the cold chain to see how the vaccines were managed in a big warehouse, how they were managed in a hospital pharmacy, how they were managed in a commercial pharmacy, how they were handled in public health centers, and how they were administered. And so they would then, they would work in teams of 3, and they would come up with better plans for how to manage the vaccines in Indonesia, in Brazil, in Tanzania, wherever they were from. And I actually got to go on that bus course one year. And I started off, my first real job was at the Medical University of South Carolina. And I've retained an interest in medical education, public health education ever since. And so I had mentioned just casually, Umid had invited me over to Geneva to talk about authentic learning. And I casually mentioned, you know, I think we could put that bus course online. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, I think we could recreate the experience of traveling down the cold chain in an online authentic learning course. And we got the funding from the Gates Foundation and other groups to do that. And we developed, through design-based research, a phenomenal course that now they can give it to hundreds of people every year, whereas before they could only do it for 15 people. And so now they, you know, and that design has been transferred to other courses for example, how to inspect clinical trials in developing countries. So that the methodology that we developed. So I've got a lot of literature published on that I could share with anyone who's interested. But it really was a great example of design-based research applied to a real-world problem. And oh, by the way, I recruited a doctoral student to work with me on it, Jim Vesper, and he won the Dissertation of the Year award from the Association for Talent Development, ATD. Used to be called ASTD, but he got the Dissertation of the Year a few years ago for that study, and they flew him out to Denver, gave him a cash prize and everything. So that we were all very proud of that. I co-chaired that dissertation study with Jen Harrington from Murdoch University in Australia.
Yep, who's assigned next week in my other class, her book with her husband, Tony Harrington. So we have a couple things we're going to do with Tom. One is ask me anything. So, or ask Tom anything. We've already got 2 questions up, one from Sunmei and one from Rachel. So let's go with Sunmei first, since hers was posted first, and then Rachel, and then whoever wants to jump in after. Sunmei.
Yeah, that's because actually I'm a developer right now, and also I'm working, you know, on the dissertation for my study. And then just always I thought about that there is a really big gap, you know, just between the, you know, emerging technology and then actual technology applied to the educational environment. As an expert, what do you think? Why it happened? Why there is really big difference?
Well, and that's a great question. One of the reasons is because the research often is not done in the environments in which it's supposed to be used. And I remember years ago, one of the most well-funded projects, millions and millions of dollars went into the algebra tutorial that was developed in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University. It was an intelligent tutoring system for algebra. And they spent millions of dollars. And I heard that the main person behind this, a guy named John Anderson, who had a learning theory called what was it called?
ACT-STAR.
Yeah, to back this up. And they did good research, but he admitted this was a big session at AERA, and he said, we developed this wonderful intelligent tutoring system, and then we threw it over the walls of the classroom. It's a complete splat. It didn't work. Teachers couldn't implement it. And it was a complete failure. And then they had to do another 7 years of research to get it to where it could actually be used by real teachers with real students in real classrooms. And the real value of design-based research is you start working in the classrooms with the practitioners, with the kids who have the problems. And so you don't have that problem of, this technology is going to be the solution to all our problems, virtual reality, 3D printers. It's not about the technology. It's about the pedagogical problems, the challenges, the implementation issues. All of that is really what's critical. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons.
So the ACT theory of motivation is from John Anderson, as he said, from Carnegie Mellon. And it's complex. It says, I'm trying to look this up, how it's defined. But yeah, you'll have to look it up online. I'm trying to get a real quick answer, but it's not quickly available for what ACT-STAR stands, but it's a spreading of activation. So it's a cognitive theory. But he developed both a tutor for algebra and geometry. And they didn't test either one out, as Tom pointed out. So Sune, you were saying?
I'm just feel that there is a kind of gap between the actual technician, I mean the developer, and the real practitioner and teacher. So I think that there is just some gap. So that's it. Anyway, we made a really good tool, but teachers can understand how it works, how to use that, right? Is that kind of reason?
Yeah, that is a huge gap. I remember years ago, they developed a system out in California. Was that also at Stanford or Berkeley? No, I think it was at Berkeley. WISE, what was the WISE? All these acronyms, I forget what they mean, but it was another tutoring system. It was really well designed, and they had tested it out and found good results in California, where the researchers were doing the studies. And so one of our doctoral students at Georgia, Kevin Oliver, who's now a full professor at North Carolina State University, he was working with Michael Hanifin, and they tried to use this exact same tool with rural schools in Georgia, and it was a huge flop. And they used the same protocols and so forth, but there are huge differences, cultural differences. The readiness of teachers to adopt innovations, readiness of parents to accept innovations, all kinds of issues come up. And so I don't think innovators often appreciate how complex that problem can be. We've even seen it with the vaccines, by the way. I mean, there are still so many people. I get the report from the New York Times every day of how many people have been vaccinated. And although among seniors, I'm a senior at age 75, there's like a 92% vaccination rate, but among younger folks, it's much less.
So this is an Ask Me Anything session, and we go to Rachel next. And then I want to get people who know Tom, but let them get to ask something they haven't asked. So we'll go to Sarah next after Rachel, and then Yo-Yoey.
Great. So my question is kind of a three-parter, but it's really, I think, two questions. So the first part is how many people need to be involved, excluding the participants? Like, we're not talking about sample size. When you're conducting DBR, how many people, you have the researcher, you have the faculty, instructor person, how many other people, or is that enough?
Rachel, you need to introduce, who do you work for, Rachel?
Oh, I'm sorry. So long name, Commission on English Language Program Accreditation. I work for an accreditor of English language programs in higher ed that are all over the world. We accredit 350 programs. About 10% of those are outside the United States and the rest are inside, but it's private institutions, colleges, universities, small, large, everything in between.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, by the way, my Fulbright year in Peru, I was there at the National Technical University, and about 2 weeks into my Fulbright, the university went on strike and remained on strike for the rest of my time in Peru, my rest of my year. And the entire university system of the country was shut down for almost a whole year. And there were, I couldn't even get on campus because they had barricades and burning buildings. I mean, it was unbelievable. So the Fulbright Commission recalled me to Lima and said, how would you like to travel around the country doing workshops for ESL teachers? And I said, well, that sounds good, since I can't get on my campus. And so I ended up traveling all over Peru doing two kinds of workshops. One was teaching them how to write better assessments, better tests. And the other was how to use this hot new technology. What do you think the hot new technology in Peru in 1979 was? The overhead projector.
Awesome.
So I was doing workshops on how to design overheads for those projectors and so forth. So that's showing how far I go back, I guess. But anyway, so the question is a good one, but it really depends on the context. So, for example, I had Unjung Oh, who is now an associate professor at the University of Illinois.
She got her master's at IU.
Yeah, she did. She did. Great. One of the best doctoral students I ever had. She got her undergraduate degree at Ewha University in Korea in educational technology. I visited Ewha. It's a wonderful, wonderful university. Anyway, she was interested in how adults, how you could improve group learning among adults in online courses. And so we put my evaluation course online and we enrolled students from Australia, South Africa, Europe, Canada, US, lots of different US universities and so forth. And we did, it was really just three of us, two doctoral students and myself. And we did 3 iterations of the course, each time improving the support for adults working in groups. And it was just a great study. The other student, Ying Liu, who's now at can't remember that it's in Chicago. I can't remember. It's not the University of Chicago, but one of the other schools there. Anyway, she focused her dissertation on self-regulated learning in the context of the same course. So it was only 3 of us doing the research. Whereas other studies involve scores of people, like the WHO study or the study that we've been doing in prisons, looking at applying DBR to improving morals education programs. Unfortunately, that we were going gangbusters and then COVID hit, and all of our programs were dependent on volunteers going into prisons and teaching these courses. Obviously, no volunteers could go into prisons for, well over a year. And so we really were set back. It's getting back up to strength now. But so it really depends on the context. There's no specific number of folks. It could be just a couple or 3, or it could be scores.
Okay.
Rachel, why don't you ask one of the other 2 questions and then we'll move on to the next person. Yeah.
Awesome. So DBR sounds a lot like action-based research. What would you say is the difference between them?
I love it. Can I share my screen again?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. the conference that I spoke at in Turkey in May, I gave a keynote for their medical education conference, was called Design-Based Research and Action Research in the Context of Medical Education. And so I addressed that very issue. So let me bring these, let me go back to share my screen here. Oops. Where do I go to share my screen? There we go. Screen. Okay. So you see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
So action research is usually conducted by insiders. So people within a medical school, within say a context like your own, or within a particular K-12 school. And it starts with a local goal setting. And in fact, one of the big problems in medical schools today is nobody comes to lectures anymore. They figured out that, you know, they're recording those lectures anyway. I can get together with other medical students in a study group. We can, you know, jump back and forth within a lecture, and we, by the way, we found out what the questions are going to be on the test, so we can study those. That's a whole other issue. And you also explore relevant theory and practice. You identify research questions. You go through multiple forms of data collection, most of them probably qualitative in nature, and analyze and report. And your results are used to inform action. You know, what are the things we could do to improve attendance at lectures, if you really think that lectures are important. It's often less important than other types. Excuse me, not less important, it's very important, often less formal than other types of research, but it can yield scholarly publications. So within the medical education field, for example, you know, here's some examples of some recent articles that I found. Developing a reflection guide tool for underperforming medical students, an action research project. Improving a newly adapted teaching and learning approach, collaborative learning cases using action research. That was in the Korean Journal of Medical Education, in the European Journal of Public Health. The Project on Medical Education Without Discrimination was another action research study. And then, as we've seen, DBR is very different. This was a slide I used in the little presentation I did earlier, but that you start by addressing maybe a larger scale problem than just figuring out how to get people to come to lectures. And you work very closely with practitioners, but it's usually a team of, you know, researchers, maybe from universities or from a professional organization like the WHO, that are working with practitioners. And, you know, then you go through all the other things I talked about. And but you're not just trying to solve a local problem, you're trying to get generalizable knowledge that can be shared with others. And so just to show an example, you know, some articles that are DBR studies in the medical education literature, design and evaluation of team-based interprofessional practice placement, a design-based research approach. In the Canadian Medical Education Journal, developing a dashboard to meet the needs of residents in a competency-based training program, a DBR study project. And this was one of the ones that I wrote with Jim Vesper and Umit Kartuglu on the bus and online, instantiating an interactive learning environment through design-based research. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, I will share these slides with Kurt, and he can put them up on his website or whatever way you share those types of things.
So I'll have them in Dropbox maybe, and then I will also have a trainingshare.com, and I will create a YouTube video out of this session, and I'll send that video to my class and to everyone who attended this. Soon may make sure you write down the names of folks, or they can write to me, Amani and Haley, and I'll send you the YouTube video link. So let's go on to Sarah, who has a question for you, Tom. What would you like to ask? Anything? Ask Tom anything. She's shaking her head. No.
Are you calling on me, Kurt? or
Yeah,
Sumi?
yeah, you, Sarah.
I have a question for both you and Tom. When are you coming to Houston?
Oh, I would love to come down there. As you know, Trisha's sister lives not too far outside of Houston, and we would love to get down there again, that's for sure.
I'll have Christmas in San Antonio with my daughter, but it's close, and in Dallas for a day. Houston was, yeah, well, I can try, yeah. I want to come. So, okay, that's a great question. Any follow-up, Sarah?
No,
No, okay.
I have a study that is calling for DBR.
Okay.
I just need Tom to write it up.
I think he's grabbing a Westie, if I'm not mistaken. Here we got a Westie coming our way.
There we go.
And so let's go on.
There's our favorite dog.
Well, this is Zipper. He's 16, and he is totally deaf and mostly blind, but he is just so lovable. And he's been, throughout this class, he's been scratching on my door. So I just wanted to let him in. You doing okay, buddy? Yeah, okay.
We all want that dog now.
He usually sleeps under my desk or around my desk and so forth. So,
okay. Well, who do we have here, Rachel?
This is my 13-year-old Yorkie named Augie, and she usually sleeps behind my desk.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. It's Augie the doggy. Okay. And Sarah, what do we have with you?
So Haley was asking about my horses, and yes, I do have 4 horses. I wish I could show them to you outside this window, but they're up at the barn because I'm a little late in feeding them. So yes, dogs, horses, barn cats, you name it, donkey, pony. Yes, we have a menagerie here in Texas.
I know one's named Lena, right?
There's Cinco.
Cinco.
Yes, so Lena is my heart horse, but I also have a great big thoroughbred and the dogs are playing under me. So that's not me growling and doing all kinds of dog things. We have 4 dogs, and they're all, I don't think I can show them to you, but they're here.
So one of our former doctoral students from Georgia, Tanya Doucet, who's been teaching at the University of Idaho, before that at the University of Wyoming, just accepted a new position at the University of Alaska. And today she posted a picture of she and her husband are driving from Idaho to Alaska, and they have in their vehicle, they have a large, beautiful husky dog, a cat, and a bearded lizard. So they had a picture of these 3 animals in the car. And of course, you got some challenges with the lizard. You have to keep their cage or aquarium type thing at a certain temperature and so forth. So they've got like a 14-day trip because they're stopping off to visit people along the way.
You don't want to freeze your lizard on the way,
No,
but only Alaska would accept anybody, I mean, really. So I think we're going to go to Yayoi for our question. but I know also Yua Ma has a follow-up because she lives in Chicago and she's going to tell you about the universities in Chicago. Yayoi.
Thank you very much for the link, Kat. And very nice to see you, Tom, again.
Likewise.
And I have a question about random sampling you talked about. If you have not a big number of the participants, like 30 or 60 student participants, is there any good way to do random sampling?
Well, certainly, if you have, it depends on the nature of what your treatment is. So, you know, again, if you're testing a vaccine, probably 60 people would not be enough. But if you were trying to, say, test a particular way of teaching English with some kind of program like, say, Duolingo or something like that, then if you could randomly assign, say you had a version. We actually did this in the WHO vaccine course. The initial interface that we developed, and the World Health Organization had paid a lot of money for, the artist had designed a very cartoon-looking interface. It was clever, it was cute. The practitioners hated it. And so we did an experimental study. We showed them examples of that version and some other version. The actual course ended up using what doesn't look cute and clever, but really works. Yeah, certainly if you had 60 participants, for a lot of educational studies, that probably would be sufficient.
There's another answer to that is don't do a randomized study and have them serve as their own controls. Everyone serves as their own control group, in effect, by getting a baseline and then looking at the growth within the different treatments that might take place over a series of weeks or months within the courses that you're teaching. That's another way, or do individual case studies of people and just ignore the treatment control comparisons, as Tom was pointing out to begin with, and maybe doing a more phenomenological study or an ethnographic type of study, which again, in Houston, Mimi's work in the qualitative side of things, there are many branches of qualitative psychology, qualitative inquiry that you can explore in teaching English to Japanese students and avoid that treatment control comparison altogether. I thought that's where you were going with this, Tom. So I thought, yeah. Yeah, sure. We're glad to see you here.
Yes, absolutely.
So Yayoi helped us run a conference in 2008 in Las Vegas, and I'll be back in Vegas next month for ACT. It was it was the biggest e-learn conference they ever had. I think over 1,000 people, and Tom Reeves and I and Yayoi were all part of it. It was a special e-learning in Asia week. And so the book came out of it, and Tom and I have had several books since then. So when we met Yayoi in 2008, our lives changed. So Tom and I it really did change. It wasn't just due to Yayoi. There are 10 other people from different parts of Asia who came all to the same conference. So we were blessed to meet Yayoi, and I was blessed to hang out with her in Tokyo, actually.
Right.
Yuama. She's in St. Xavier University in Chicago on the south side. So Tom's former student might be at Northeastern Illinois, Loyola, DePaul, University of Chicago, University of Illinois Spring, Chicago. Any of those colleges, universities, Tom? Which one?
I'm gonna.
He's gonna punt.
I just can't remember right offhand. She changed. She was at the University of Wisconsin, and then she changed recently. Her husband got a new job, and she followed him to Chicago.
Right. Otherwise, you don't leave Wisconsin. Yeah. Yua, what's your question for Tom?
Sure. I think I have two questions. The first question is, it sounds like the EDR is create a prototype learning environment. Sounds like you have to test it out and to see whether it's working, correct? If I understand correctly. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So one of the steps you mentioned about the EDR is create a prototype learning environment informed by theory and practice, and then you test it out until outcomes are reached.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
The outcomes are they hypotheses coming out of those learning prototype, or are those like just theory informed practices? I'm just curious how you define those outcomes.
Yeah, people actually, there's a whole bunch of literature on that. Phil Bell, who's at University of Washington, I think, he calls them conjectures. Other people call them design principles. In fact, some people in Israel have built what's called a design principles database, where they have collected together these principles that have come out of DBR across a whole lot of different contexts. So yeah, they could be, but other people talk about them as hypotheses. That's one of the issues about DBR, EDR. There's no conformity in the literature, and even the basic terms. I mean, they call design-based research educational design research, developmental research, development research. There are a host of other names. So that's one of the issues, but you could call them hypotheses, conjectures. What were some of the others? I'm having a senior moment, but there are other terms for that type of thing.
So you need to explain your job before you ask question number 2.
Sure. So I work as instructional designer. I lead a team of instructional designers. So I consider myself as a practitioner. I work closely with faculty member on, developing online classes and also adopting technology into their teaching, either face-to-face or online. So I guess my second question actually closely related to my role, since I see myself as a practitioner. So for those research between researcher and practitioner, who usually brought up this questions, who lead this EDR project?
Yeah, and that's where, for example, at the University of Georgia, I had a lot of students who did DBR, but more often than not, they had to go out finding a professor with whom to work, and rather than the professors beating on the doors of, our Department of Learning, Design, and Technology. So, for example, Hanam Abado, who's now a full professor at the University of San Francisco, she wanted to do design-based research looking at inquiry-based learning in the context of STEM education. We found a professor at Georgia who was in geology, who was interested in using inquiry-based learning in some of her courses. And what we did is we went out to the geology department, went to one of their department meetings, like 30 faculty there, and we pitched the idea of doing DBR to them. And we were able to recruit one of the faculty to do that. I think that, where are you, by the way? Where are you?
Chicago.
You're in Chicago, that's
right. Southsider, St. Xavier University, a Catholic school. You're a Catholic, so you can visit.
Yeah, that's right. Bless you, my child.
Tom was going to be a priest one day, but then he thought, the next day he decided not to. But he was a chaplain's assistant in the Army.
Years
right?
at Catholic school, so I'm well versed for sure. But I think that is, say, a center like yours, if they could become known within the university as a place where you could not only get instructional design services, but you could actually get involved in the scholarship of teaching, which is a really good entry point for that. For example, that professor in geology, she got a really good publication in the Journal of Geosciences Education, we worked with another professor in the Department of Geography. He got a really good publication in the Journal of Geography, which is like a 120-year-old journal. Similarly, another student did his research with the university in Oman, David Picaro. He had a Fulbright to go to Oman, but he and his collaborator in Oman, they published an article in EDUCAUSE Review. So usually when I work with students, I get them to publish their dissertation as a set of articles. So there's one article will be a literature review, another article would be a theoretical framework, one or two articles would be descriptions of iterations of the study itself. And then I always insist that they do a practitioner article, that they write with the practitioners that they worked with, and they publish in a practitioner-oriented journal. And that way, my students have come out of graduate school with 4 or 5 publications under their belt, just out of their dissertation.
So that reminds me that we don't have much time left, so make sure you ask a question, jump in here and say, but every discipline tends to have a flagship education journal. And the medical field has several of them. And many are social science citation index. I'll have a brief story here and then we'll go to the next question. When I graduated, I used to be an accountant or a CPA, and I got to West Virginia University, and the guys from the accounting department came to see me. You're an accountant and you're an ed psych person. Let's work on reshaping the accounting curriculum for the world, And so we wrote a few pieces, and one of them we sent to the Journal of Accounting Education. It sat on the editor's desk for 3 years, or 2.5 in effect. Then it sat on our desk for 1.5 years. We didn't revise it right away. We sent it back and it sat another 3 years. It took 7 years for the article to come out, but it did change the world. It's cited many times. We had several on changing the accounting curriculum. But the medical field is flush with and Tom's published in many. I have one in review in medical teacher and medical ed. So do try for those. Tom, I'm sorry to cut you off. You're going to say something else there.
Oh, I saw that Rachel, I'm not seeing, I haven't gone through all the chat, but Rachel has a question about her dissertation topic.
Yes, so let's go to the questions about dissertation topics like Rachel's and Shannon's and so forth. Then we're going to take a break after a couple of these. So we'll have to say goodbye to Tom, but Rachel, jump in.
Okay, so my dissertation, the way I think about it is I do think about the big problem first. So universities and colleges need to continue to recruit students, and they're opening up their admissions to more students who might be underprepared. There's lots of the pandemic and there's lots of other reasons why students might be cheating. So related to academic integrity, how are faculty who are being prepared to teach online prepared to deal with violations of academic integrity? So I think that's what the problem is that institutions want to keep students, even if they've cheated, depending on what the cheating was. Faculty may or may not feel prepared. I'm thinking they're not prepared fully or feel supported in that preparation for cheating. And there's so many reasons why students might cheat, but training for faculty would help them. So if I'm thinking about that as the big problem, how do I approach that from a design-based research lens?
Yeah, well, and by the way, I'm sure you've seen the news reports. That is a huge problem. One of the big flaws in online learning during the pandemic was the prevalence of cheating and other issues and so forth, integrity issues. Yeah, I guess I would. I think it would be a great approach for DBR to work with the faculty, figure out, okay, what's the real nature of the problem? If, for example, they are, some places are using technologies now that literally spy on students, and there are all kinds of issues with that, because a lot of students, for example, you've seen me in this program, I have my background faded out, right? Because my office is a mess. But a lot of students don't even know how to do that sort of thing. And they don't want people to see where they live and so forth. And they don't have, nice offices or whatever. And so they tend not to participate as much. But getting back to the cheating issue, I think that could be a really good, DBR could be a real good way to approach that, working with some faculty and students to try to really understand the nature of the problem, and then what could be some prototype solutions to that, that maybe don't involve spying technology, but that involve some other types of solutions.
Thank you.
So we have to move to Shannon, who's my other doctoral student, hasn't asked anything yet. Shannon, you want to give it a shot and see what Tom can come up with?
For some reason, my video isn't working, so we'll have to look at Marshall. Okay, Marshall's back. I don't really have any questions per se, even though my research is focused on medical student education. I'm really looking at it more towards instructional designers and how they're utilized, how they work collaboratively with the faculty. But while Dr. Reeves was talking about one of the papers that he had reviewed, it gave me this really, I think, great idea that when I send out my survey to these instructional designers that work in medical student education, I want to tack on some questions. I'm thinking, and you can correct me if this is a bad idea, I'm thinking since I'm sending the survey out, and even though questions about what they did online pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID, if they're still doing that stuff, really isn't tied to my dissertation. I think since I have the audience of instructional designers, just ask them other questions that, I might be able to do some sort of paper with at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay to do?
Before you answer, where do you work? You want to tell them where you work?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I work for the Indiana University School of Medicine. I'm an instructional designer with the Department of Family Medicine at the IU School of Medicine.
Yeah. Oh, when I was at MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina, I loved working with the family medicine folks. And they and the nursing folks were the best.
Yeah, they're the warm, fuzzy doctors.
Yeah, actually. They're not the MD that you get in surgery.
Exactly. They're not ortho.
But anyway, I think that would be feasible. If you want to send me any specific questions, through email or something like that, please do, and I can address that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just kind of popped in my head because my original dissertation was before COVID, and it was actually going to be on the lack of online learning in medical student education because there's really not a lot of it true like online learning. It's just like PDFs and PowerPoints, but COVID did change that somewhat. So I kind of dropped that idea and decided to go for this other slant.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, my former student, Dr. Ying Liu, she's now at National Louis University.
Right. Yeah, I spoke there.
School in Chicago, founded in 1886.
Yep, pretty well known. And you could, Shannon, you could send Tom your prospectus when you get that done. That might be a possibility too.
Awesome,
Nelson,
thank you.
Nelson keeps shaking his head, and so I wonder if he's got something he's shaking a question around in your head and it's ready to pop out. Go ahead, Nelson.
Yeah, I wrote it down in the chat, and it was thank you for your presentation today. And in it, you talked about how a lot of the stuff that we work with are the technologies we don't create ourselves, like iPads, VR tech, computers, and websites. And then you also mentioned how in DBR, there's a lot of prototyping involved to address, make solutions for problems. So I was asking, like, why, even though we're churning out a lot of prototypes, how come we're also not creating new products that are the same products that we end up studying? Like, how can we increase that or address that?
Yeah, and that's a perennial problem, Nelson. That I was telling somebody the other day, when I first went to Georgia, I spent several years teaching teachers basic because they were going to be programmers and they were going to program their own learning modules and so forth. And then we stopped teaching basic and we started teaching pilot, and then we started teaching them HyperCard, and you know, we went through all these different technologies with the notion that somehow teachers were going to create their own materials. That's a dead horse for me as well. But I don't know. You know, it's very frustrating because all these exciting new things come out all the time, and we grab onto them. You know, I remember seeing color ads in magazines. You know, 3D printers are going to revolutionize education. Well, and they do play a role, like in maker spaces and things like that. And some of those programs can have good results within the context of STEM or STEAM education. But yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, Nelson. You know, if we ever figure that one out, maybe we'll realize the potential of technology in education. I'm actually giving a talk here at Berry later in November. It's going to be called something like 100 Years of No Significant Differences, because Thomas Edison predicted, when he invented the film projector, that within 10 years, all textbooks would disappear and everybody would get their education through films. And we've seen that particular promise told again and again. In my lifetime, it was programmed instruction, and then it was educational television, and then it was computer-based instruction, then it was interactive video discs, then it was DVD, and then now it's virtual reality, and all of it's going to revolutionize education. Augmented reality, you know, it's not.
Well, I will say that I've just finished Thomas Edison's biography. It's it's written in reverse by the decades of his life.
Oh,
it's fascinating. He's with Henry Ford at the end and William Firestone Tires. It ends the book trying to create new rubber plants at the end of the book. It is phenomenal. As a teenager, that Thomas Edison was a genius. His inventions that he made as a teenager on the telegraph could have set him up for the rest of his life. He didn't need to do all the rest of that he did, but if you want to overcome the fear of submission to a journal, read that biography. I mean, he had failure after failure after failure. You know, you have to have thick skin sometimes to read the reviews. But if you submit to another journal if one doesn't like, and you revise it, you make it better, and you respond to it, and you do the best job you can. Eventually, you know, if you do a good job, eventually you're going to find an outlet for most everything, not everything, most everything. If you're dedicated, you're collaborative with other people, you're optimistic to some degree, cautiously optimistic, as Nelson said, not everything's going to work, you know. So there are no significant differences. Maybe some of those studies don't find their way to an outlet, but they should. We should hear about the failures and the no significant differences along the way. We have three people we haven't heard from. I want to hear from one of them before we go. Karen, Fong, or Amani, do any of you want to have the last question asked for tonight?
Hello. Yeah, sure. Well, as a first-year graduate student, and listening to everyone's talk, what advice would you guys give a first-year doctorate student in educational technology who's, making her way and trying to find, a dissertation topic and trying to find a topic of research that interests her in this field? What is your, advice?
So before we answer that, Nelson, Amani, Fong, and Karen, you're at the University of Houston, right?
Yes.
Can you all tell us who your advisor is so we know who we're advising? Amani, who's your advisor?
So when I initially spoke in the video, you told me about Susie Gromseth. I'm working as her research assistant, but my advisor is Dr. Dogan, Bulant Dogan.
Yeah, right. And Nelson?
Dr. Mimi Lee.
Okay, great. And Karen?
I am actually working with Dr. Mimi Lee also.
Two of you.
I'm working on my candidacy right now.
Okay, girl, say hi from me. We have Tom and I have two books with her. And Fawn? Am I saying that right? Fawn? Nagayan? Maybe Fong's doesn't, your audio's muted, Fong. Well, okay. Anyways, Tom, you want to take a crack at that question about how one finds a research topic? And I have an answer too. What does a first-year student in the search for a topic do?
Yeah, well, one of the things I would do is think about what you're interested in and who you might work with. But I would go to dissertation abstracts and find dissertations that have been done, maybe at Houston or at Indiana or Georgia, wherever, but look at some dissertations that use, that address problems that you're concerned about, that you're interested in, and really you get a sense of what a dissertation is. It's not a dissertation. The only good dissertation is a done dissertation, okay? It's not your life's work. It's an important piece of research that's your ticket to a lifetime of scholarship. So you don't want it to, I've had some students that took 10 years to finish their degrees, not my advisees, but I know of other students. And, you want to see how others have done it. There's nothing wrong. When I was a PhD student at Syracuse, I wanted to do a huge quantitative study using something called multiple regression analysis, commonality analysis. And so I bought for like $30 a copy of the dissertation that Lena Leonhardt had done at the University of Pittsburgh. And it gave me a roadmap to how to do my study. My study was a totally different context, totally different types of data, but it gave me a mental model of what it was going to be, how to do it. Actually, I wrote up my prospectus. I sent it to her major advisor at Pittsburgh. He in turn sent it to the NIE, which was the Department of Education in those days. And they sent me $10,000 to do my study. They paid for all my travel because I collected data in 44 high schools in New York State. And that gave me all the travel money I needed to do my study. So look at other models.
Yeah, I'll add to that in that every grad class you're taking, every article you're reading, there's an ending of that article that has future directions in it. And they also have limitations in it. And there's a literature review that will say there's a gap in the literature here. And the study that you're reading is meant to fill that gap, but often it doesn't fill the gap at all. It only provides a small window into what's happening within that phenomenon. So you have three possibilities within every article to find your study. It's not going to be in the methods section typically. Methods just, this is how they're approaching the answer or the investigation to solve a problem. That the problems that will be in the lit review, the problems will be in the future directions, the problems will be in the limitations, the problems will be in the discussion. So when I went through grad school, I did 2 years as a master's student, and I had 60 credits. I only needed 12 more. I only needed one semester of doctoral work. And in that one semester, and actually I lie a little bit here, in all those master's courses, I had this paper that I was writing ideas on. And then I wrote idea one, article, here's the article, here's the page number, here's the possible study. Here's the second possible study. This is in this article. So every study that I found a problem in, I wrote them down. I put this in the closet. I didn't want this near me. I would grab it out of the closet, and I didn't want to constantly be looking at this over and over. I just had them there in reserve. I wasn't necessarily, actually, I was there for a master's degree. I wasn't planning on a doctorate, okay? It just, by the time I got to do my doctorate, I had 68 possible dissertation ideas through that method. And I went with number 48, which was actually a combination number 19 and 28. I combined two ideas together, and we did a keystroke mapping of writing, kids writing with computer prompting. My friend Tom Reynolds, who did the book with Tom Reeves and Mimi Lee and I, he developed the software, I developed the method. So also collaborating with others, talking to others. Tom and I would meet on Lake Mendota in Wisconsin, overlooking the lake on a Friday afternoon, chatting about our research and what the possibilities are. We chat in his office late at night. So have a colleague you can chat with, write the ideas down. As Tom says, look at Dissertation International. I just put the link to my class here This class is on dissertation proposal writing. You can have all my notes. If you go to Dropbox, there's examples of prospectuses for EDDs and dissertation proposals and dissertations for PhDs or EDDs. They're all in there, as well as many other things you'll find. Writing, I like writing tips. So I've got a whole section on writing. And tonight after break, I'm going to have 10 tips for writing a dissertation and 10 tips on revising a dissertation. So I'm really interested in, actually, Mimi Lee had me speak at the Houston students, and when Tom and I were there last in, 4 or 5, when it was 2016. Well, that's not the last, in 2016, and then again in, we were there in 2020, right before the pandemic, Tom and I were. But in 2016, I spoke to the students at Houston on dissertation writing tips, and I've been expanding on that. So those are a couple of things. There's many things you can do. And if you want my writing, so I've done a workshop on the 3 G's of writing tips, or the G3 of writing tips: gentle guidelines, great stories, and gigantic scholarly gains. And I can send you those tips too. So in part, it's being a seeker of knowledge. Always look for things in what you're reading. And in part, it's reflecting afterwards on what you found and making sense of those and rearranging those and juxtaposing one idea against another for what, this is really, and then when you find 2 or 3 ideas, write up a paragraph on each one. And the idea that you're most passionate about will come through when you're writing the paragraph or 2 on each idea. If you can't write a paragraph or 2 about it, don't do that one. Do the one in which you can write a paragraph or 2 that gets you inspired. Even if it's gobbledygook, even if it's total gibberish, it's something that got you going and thinking and so forth. And from that gibberish that you're writing, you can revise it. But if there's nothing there, if there's a sentence, don't do that one. Okay, that's my advice. So I got many more advices. Tom's probably got a couple more based on what I said, though.
Well, Karen, did you have a question before we wind up?
That's right.
Yeah. Actually, my question is really about, we talked about DBR, addressing wicked problems. And I think like one of the problems that I have really is trying to focus my research. It seems like there's just by the way, I teach chemistry. So my research is in teaching of chemistry. I teach it at the community college level. So one of my issues that I seem to always have is to be able to focus my research into something that's doable within, a PhD program. Can you give any advice about that?
Yeah, well, there again, I bet you can find some dissertations that have addressed, educational challenges within the context that you're talking about, community colleges and so forth. One of the things that comes to mind right away is, students, I remember chemistry was my toughest course. I think, and I'm sure it still is one of the toughest courses. But but getting students engaged in active learning with chemistry, where they're not just memorizing the table of elements and all that kind of stuff, but where they're actually seeing, say, the role of chemistry in their real lives. And what was the company that used to say, better living through chemistry? Or the company was the motto. But anyway, I would look for some dissertations that focused on that issue. But motivation and engagement would be 2 issues within.
Right. Actually, that's initially what my research has started on. Now I'm looking at, doing labs, things like labs online. And I'm looking at perceptions of that because I've realized that in this field that there's lots of pushback on it. But what I'm saying is that even within that topic, it seems like you can go on, you seem to want to tackle this big issue that has all of these different contexts to it and different, these different problems within it, when you need to really kind of focus on one little thing that can, and I'm not, I'm having trouble actually focusing it on there.
Yeah. Well, if you have any specific questions or just want to discuss this further, you can email me. We can set up a Zoom call or something like that. Okay. And I'd be glad to talk with you about that.
Tom, you want to
Okay,
put your email
great,
in
thank
the
you.
chat window? Tom?
Yeah, I can do that. Sure.
And Karen, what community college? Are you Houston Community College? Or
Houston Community College,
I've
yes.
spoken there before. It's a big place.
Yes,
and
it's a big.
And I can also agree with Tom. I never took chemistry. So we had a guy in high school, our high school teacher created a new way to cook Oscar Mayer hot dogs or something. And this guy was a real hot dog of a person. And I didn't want to, he was not a good teacher. And so I avoided him like the plague, Mr. Bonner. So I've never took chemistry. I really regret it now later in life tremendously. So Karen, glad to have Houston students and students of Dr. Lee and students of Susie and Sarah say hi from us. I will send the link, to you guys for the video. We'll make a copy. So Nelson, Karen, Fong, and Amani, thanks. Yayoi, thanks for coming in, and my students as well, Sunmi and everyone. I want to point out in 2 weeks, we're going to have Michael Thomas, who does a lot of cross-cultural education work. He's at University of Illinois, Chicago, and he's a qualitative methods expert. He was a former student of ours at Indiana, got his doctorate here. Actually, at the same time, Dr. Lee was working, so they know each other. That's September 27th at the same, he'll be at 7:15, so 6:15 Houston time. And then we have on October 11th, Florence Martin, who's my colleague now at NC State. She moved to NC State from UNC Charlotte. She's going to talk about systematic reviews. And Florence and I have done 2 special issues on systematic reviews of the research. So at 6 o'clock, which is 5 o'clock Houston time on October 11th. On October 18th, Merve Bazdagan, my advisee, is going to give 10 tips on writing literature reviews and 10 tips on forming research questions. And she's also going to talk about survey tools at 6 o'clock, which is 5 o'clock in Houston on October 18th. 1 or 2, and we're also going to have John Hitchcock that night, a former professor at IU, talk about mixed methods. So that's an interesting night there. I could send this all to you. So those are just some of those. There's other things coming up, but those are some that you might find of value. Let's thank Tom Reeves. A big round of applause for it's a very special time here, as I haven't seen him in so long. So I'm really delighted he said yes. And he also said yes to next week. So I'm going to take him out of retirement here and make him work hard for a couple of weeks. So Tom, thank you very much for everything.
Thank you all. And good luck in your scholarship. And I'm around and I can help if I can. So thank you very much. Good evening.
So I'm going to stop the recording at this point.